Hey friends, welcome to the Chief Future Officer podcast. In today's episode, I have Kurt McFarland with me. Kurt is a managing director at Regen Impact and an interim CEO at FLINTpro. Great to have you here, Kurt.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Before we get started with today's podcast, big congratulations to your new arrival.
Thank you very much. Yes, we had our son Kaya born 8 weeks ago, and so we are in the middle of all the newborn fun and a little bit of chaos as well.
So you having sleepless nights?
He's got a reasonable sleep rhythm at the moment, as good as can be expected for this stage, I would say. So but I'm here, which says something.
Fantastic. Thanks for taking the time out. I know it's pretty busy and hectic as a new parent, so congrats again. And we'll talk finance and we'll discuss parenting on the side.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
So Kurt, you have a pretty impressive bio. I want to jump on to the thing to get started. You've done a couple of serious impact-driven leadership roles. I want to hear about it. Can you talk about them?
Absolutely. So I think it's helpful to understand. My background was from the investment banking world, so I didn't start out necessarily trying to do good in the world. I was drawn into the banking industry pre-financial crisis, and that was that was an amazing experience to be honest overall, and a good training ground for many of the skills that I've utilized later in my career. So I was working as an analyst in the sort of mergers and acquisitions team at Macquarie, and enabled me to sort of work overseas and subsequently have a number of roles in the investments and M&A space. And I think there was at some point there during that journey, I got sort of itchy feet. I didn't see myself being a career banker as such, and I decided to, as some of us do, decided to go to business school and figure things out. And after business school, I began working with startups mostly, and that was where I was looking for something more operational, not just being an advisor and being at a sort of arm's length to businesses. And I really, really enjoyed working in that environment and working in the startup sort of VC-backed environment. And after a few years of that, when I sort of reflected on the types of companies that I wanted to work with and the causes that are important to me, I had a realization that the environment and climate change are the things that matter most to me, and decided to start exploring ways that I could bring those areas and that passion into the types of businesses that I'm working with. And so it's been a journey, and it's an ongoing journey, but it's something that really motivates me and drives me forward.
Got it. Thank you for that. I'm just curious, does climate change attract outside investors, or mostly driven by a few group of mission-driven folks coming together and, of course, going on and picking up, let's say, solar or earth or any other technology?
So climate change is quite a broad umbrella that captures a lot of different industries. And so when I was looking to enter into the space or to sort of understand it a bit better, I guess there was certainly an educational piece for me that took some time to understand what are the different areas and which ones resonate most with me and where I feel that I could have the most impact, or the areas that I feel most drawn to. So certainly, I think of it as there's a lot of decarbonization is a big theme. If you think of the areas that of our economy and industry that need to have carbon removed from the production side of things, or certainly from the emission side. So renewables are a key one for energy. Think of all the other buildings and industrial processes that are going on. That's a huge area. There's also like our food system, and so relating to agriculture and also using nature-based solutions as a way to reduce carbon and offsets in that area. And so there are many different areas. And I guess over time, I shifted. I focused more on the sort of nature-based side of things. That was something that I felt drawn to. But from an investor perspective, I guess the challenge is that VC type investors typically want returns that are commensurate with other VC type investments, which are quite high, and also they want things that are able to be patented and to put a fence around and to control them. So that lends itself more to those sort of high tech or deep tech sort of industries and plays, and sometimes the nature focused solutions, which are often the most obvious and scalable ones, are sometimes harder to get financing around because it's much harder to patent a tree or biology than it is to patent a new deep tech renewables platform.
You comment on the VC investments in climate, and of course totally agree that investors are looking for returns that are quicker, like 3 to 5 year horizon. And I very much remember 2000-ish or 2001, there was this huge thing in Silicon Valley on investing in climate tech. And only one startup I remember, because I see them on, when I go to Mountain View from my home, 237, it's a startup called Bloom Energy. And during that time, I cannot imagine how much hype they had, in terms of alternate fuel sources and energy and renewable energy generation. So I think that ship has sailed, but I kind of see that it has trickled back again. A few founders have made money going back into, investments in climate tech. Why is it so difficult?
I think that inevitably there's boom and bust cycles in all industries, and so I think that there was sort of clean tech 1.0 is sort of the phrase that was used. I think sort of post GFC, when there was a lot of government sort of funding coming into the ecosystem to try to restart things, and there was an idea that we could push all of that into renewables and we could save the day. And I think that created, at that time, it created a lot of its own sort of bubble, and a lot of investments were made that weren't commercially sound, and we saw a lot of losses there. And I think a lot of people sort of got scarred in that era, and it took a while. It took really until pre-pandemic for interest to sort of really start to pick up again in the sort of climate space more broadly. And I think also a lot of natural disasters and things like that. There was a lot of bushfires and in Australia and California, if you remember, and people started to put those things together. And so we started to see more funding flow back into the climate tech 2.0 space, I think, in that era. And then we have, with the pandemic, obviously a lot of quantitative easing and funds coming through that it's looking for a home. The funds are looking for a home, they're looking for returns, and climate ticks a lot of boxes in terms of people see it as an opportunity. They see it as something that is certainly essential, but unfortunately, when there's easy money out there, then it often will end up in a lot of companies that aren't going to work out. And so I think that we're starting to see some of that play out now. Generally across the startup ecosystem, I think there's a lot of companies that haven't been able to raise subsequent rounds of funding and are probably treading water at the moment. And I think that climate companies are certainly no exception to that. But as happens with these, I believe it will filter out those the companies that didn't really have. It'll keep the high quality companies can still raise funding, and the other, it'll filter out those that probably had more questionable business models.
Absolutely agree. I'm a tech entrepreneur, so I kind of dip my toe once in a while on climate-related tech, and then come back saying, I don't understand any of this, except having a solar at home, which is my contribution. So you graduated as a BCom honor student at University of Sydney, did your MBA at IE Business School 2014, I think you mentioned briefly, and then now you are at FLINTpro. Tell us more about FLINTpro.
So FLINTpro greenhouse gas emissions modeling platform. And so if you think of I guess in the climate space, they fit into that measure, report, and verify part of the ecosystem, which helps companies, governments, any entity really, particularly those that have land-based assets. So that the model is most effective for forestry at present, but there's looking to expand it. It can basically take huge data sets spatially, so based on like map data and over time, and look at changes in vegetation, biomass, carbon stocks in those assets, and then sort of model that into the future, particularly as you factor in climate changes, but also land management usage and changes as well.
Got it. So you mentioned land management. I was looking at a company that does a lot of satellite imaging to automatically quantify land management. Is that something that dovetails into what FLINTpro does as well?
So we certainly do utilize satellite data and other data sources as part of that, as part of the platform. I would say that our point of difference is in the way that our team is very specialized and has built up the algorithms and models that sit behind that. Over about 10 years, the company's been operating as a consultancy, more or less, in this space, and many people come from this really strong forestry background. And so there's certain things you can and can't do just based on satellite data and LiDAR imagery alone. And so there are the FLINTpro platform is able to bring in multiple different types of data sets and sort of augment them and combine them to give you sort of a holistic picture. And so, yeah, it's not just reliant on satellite imagery as some platforms are.
Got it. And you briefly touched upon greenhouse gas emissions. How scared we need to be?
It's real. I think that, certainly if you look at the headlines in any newspaper, the more extreme weather events that were forecast to be happening, in the coming decades are happening now. And so I think that that's certainly one thing to be concerned about. But the real thing is that our emissions keep going up, and so we're in this bit of a bind where we understand that there is a problem, but we are unable to, as a society, as globally, to take meaningful steps to reduce that. And there are many reasons for that. I think that the fossil fuel industry has been very effective in its sort of delay and delaying action and questioning the science over many years, and that certainly hasn't helped. But yeah, we're very dependent on fossil fuels and our way of life that requires economic growth in perpetuity. So I think all those things combined certainly are a concern and will require some bold visions, or some bold thinking, and some bold vision of how we can implement a more holistic structure for the way that we live.
Interesting. Can't agree more. We've recently, in the last 2 months, California had seen a 100-year flood. At least my neighborhood, 7 miles away, my neighborhood town, a normal block of homes had flooding, which was unheard of. And we saw the video and said, no, cannot be that neighborhood. And things of that nature. I want to learn more in terms of your role at FLINTpro. So you have you lead this organization as a finance leader. What does your day look like?
So it's a little cliched, but I would say no day is ever the same. But and it kind of depends on where you are in the month, but also in the sort of business cycle, or what the business priorities are at that given point in time. So to give you some examples, obviously as a finance leader, there are certain level of tasks related to month end and reporting and board meetings and things like that. So if it's in those periods of the month, then there's some deliverables related to relating to monthly reporting packs or helping to create board decks and the like. There's other cycles relating to fundraising. So we recently completed a Series A fundraising of $9 million. It's going to be announced very soon. So happy to give you the heads up here. And so relating to that, there was a whole lot of work going into building out the financial model and forecasts and going through due diligence with investors and things like that. So I think of it as, in terms of on a typical day, I've got three main areas that I think about, and they're sort of finance operations. Are people getting paid? Are our accounting systems working? The sort of real basic and fundamental things to finance. Then there's a sort of finance reporting an FP&A element that sort of touched on there, which is basically looking backwards and also doing any sort of analysis and looking into whether it be profitability or different contracts and the like. And then there's the third bucket, which is I think strategic finance, and so that really comes to the fore when it's around certainly these critical times of capital raising, but more importantly, just finding time to squeeze or to allocate time to those types of tasks in the day to day, so that I'm not just running around trying to solve problems in our ERP. I can actually dedicate time to moving the business forward and providing real value.
Congrats on the Series A. Amazing.
Thank you. Yes, it was. Took longer than expected, and certainly as it usually does, but certainly in this environment. But yeah, really great testament to the team and to the company that their investors put that level of support in us.
Yeah, I've been hearing that the whole macro is affecting the fundraise. The fundraise cycles have disappeared, or fundraise has completely disappeared. The sales cycle has 2x, which is, if you take 60 days, it's 90 to 120 days. Fingers crossed on where we're going to end. But since we touched on the topic, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on that. You mentioned briefly about your previous foray in the time of the previous downturn. Do you see a similarity here, what we are in right now?
It's a good question. Certainly the Silicon Valley Bank issue a few weeks ago brought back some memories of that time with around the Lehman Brothers announcement and all of that craziness. I think that was a whole other level of I think the GFC 2008 was a whole other level to what we've felt right now. So, but it's interesting that there are some warning signs or some things to keep an eye on. Certainly, I think the main difference being back then was that we just had such a massive bull run for so many years, and many of the people working in finance or just in general, even like from my generation, had never experienced a recession. Not really. Like there'd been the .com crash, but it wasn't a real, I would say, proper recession. And so I think that the difference now is that people are certainly people who are around then have some awareness of that. But I think that the solutions that are implemented to solve one crisis then sow the seeds of the next one. And I think that sort of, you see that play out all throughout history. And so, yeah, that sort of quantitative easing injections sort of lay the foundations for people to maybe not make the best investment decisions and create problems for us down the road.
It's so much relatable, at least, people who have lived at least a couple of cycles of, tech entrepreneurship or, tech venture ecosystem. things kind of keep repeating every 10 years or 15 years. I want to jump to another question, and this has been shared by other guests on the podcast, including Giri, who came very early last year, to Nikhil, who shared that their roles have evolved, and the role of the CFO has evolved. You were a wall to get things done or to not get things done earlier, to basically a conduit to get things done. So the role has evolved. People are talking about it. What is your thought? Has the CFO evolved from somebody who would say no perpetually to, yes, I'm at your service? Is that real, or is this just a eyewash that's going around?
I think so. I mean, I've certainly, I guess I've only been a CFO probably for the latter half of my career, so I can't speak in depth to how it was before. But certainly thinking about the like one of the things that has certainly changed, I think, is like the level of technology and tools and automation that are at our disposal. And so I think that certainly there was a lot more energy. I mean, this is across the board, but certainly in finance, there was a lot more energy just put into keeping the lights on, so to speak, to just doing the basic reporting tasks and grunt work and making sure everything was running smoothly and accurately. I think now that with technology and with automation, that a lot of those tasks, it's certainly not eliminated. I don't think that we're in the situation where that's all just works seamlessly, but you need to then have people in your organization, and certainly the CFO needs to understand the ins and outs of those systems, the pros and cons, and to be able to implement the right systems and tools for the organization that we're in. And so no two organizations are the same, but so understanding what are those constraints or what are those differences and what would make this tool or system work in those areas. And certainly so I think certainly that's an area of where it can add a lot of value, because there's nothing more painful than dealing with a crappy system, for lack of a better phrase, or people not getting paid right, or numbers not being accurate, or systems not talking to each other. Like, these are huge pain points and take a lot of energy from in an organization. So getting those things set up right initially, it gives you leverage as a leader. So you can get leverage from people and from processes, but systems, I think, are really an increasingly important part of our role and making sure that we're able to surface information for ourselves as finance leaders, but also to disseminate that and have that widely available to other leaders in the organization. And the more that you're able to do that and to really not just be saying no to certain expenses, being able to give others the information they need to be better in their roles and be more effective in their roles. I see that as a really critical part of my role. And so building partnerships with other department heads and leaders, and understanding what their priorities are, and helping to solve some of their problems as much as is possible. I think that's where we can add a lot of value, and I'm pretty sure that's quite different to how CFOs may have been required to direct their energy in the past.
Very interesting that you mentioned technology and improvements and systems and processes. Are there tools that still exist that you used, let's say, 10 plus years ago? I'm sure Excel probably is the one.
That was the one that I was going to say. I still haven't moved away from Excel, and with most startups that I work with, a lot of them are using a MacBook, an Apple situation, and I do for a lot of personal things, but I still stick to Microsoft because for Excel only, because I have all these macros and shortcuts that are mapped to the keys that don't translate over to the Mac. But I think that eventually I probably, from a hardware perspective, I might transition over there. But certainly Excel is the common denominator. But increasingly, like if I was starting out now and graduating college at the moment, and I don't know that would be the case. I know a lot of people that certainly certainly Google Sheets is a very powerful tool. I think there are some limitations when you're starting to get into building more complex models and having to. There are some limitations there from a lag perspective, but from a collaboration perspective, I mean, it's fantastic, and then there are many other tools that could replace the Excel as a financial model. Like, I don't think that you necessarily need it. I'm yet to find one that I, or maybe I haven't tried, them out extensively enough, but I'm yet to find one to replace that. Other tools that stand the test of time. Yeah, I think a lot of them are pretty new. Even the certain ERPs that we're using. Quite in startup world, it's a lot of Xero and QuickBooks. I think that when you have those sort of types of organizations that are really embedded into companies, it's a painful thing to change. And so, unless you're upgrading to a NetSuite or other things like that, I don't see too many changes on that front. But I think it's a lot of those add-on, whether they be APIs or other additional analytics tools and the like. There's a lot of those out there, but you certainly got to be careful just around the not letting your tech stack, and certainly the finance tech stack, to get away from you, because it can do pretty quickly. So yeah, apart from Excel, I don't think there's anything that really and the Microsoft suite in general. I don't think there's anything that really that I'm using that I was 10 years ago.
So if a fresh grad joins you today, he has to go through an Excel training for sure to learn all the macros.
I mean, they're nice to know, but I would, they're nice to know. It's not. I would like to think it's not too difficult to learn, but certainly can be very efficient if you can. I mean, we had back in the day, it was like you're not allowed to use your mouse. You had to do everything on the keyboard so that you just get really short. You're really efficient with all those shortcuts. But yeah, it's a helpful skill to have, but I don't think it's necessarily essential. I would say there's more than one way to do things. If you can get the task done efficiently using another method, I'm very open to it.
Since we talked about doing things again, if you're starting again, if a fresh grad starts a career in finance or wants to start, what advice would you give him or her?
I think the one piece of advice that I would give is to optimize learning and development opportunities. So I think that certainly as a grad and as a young person in general, there's a tendency to think about how can I, certainly we all want to proceed and we all want to get ahead of our careers. There's a tendency to over-index certainly on salary and on title and probably some other things in there, be it travel or prestige or whatever it might be. And those things are all well and good. And I can't say that I haven't pursued those types of things or prioritized those types of things at different points in my career. But if I think being able to think long term, I think if you were deciding about it, making a decision about a next career move, deciding between roles, I would think about who are you working most closely with in terms of your direct reporting manager and also laterally, and that, because that dictates a lot of that will dictate how much you can learn and how those sort of relationships and those sort of those professional relationships really determine a lot of your development on the job. And secondly, what direction is the company heading in? So are you after big established companies might often can pay you a bigger salary, but you might be a small cog in a big wheel, in a big machine that has a very, particularly in the finance world, you might have a very sort of narrowly focused job, and you might be very good at that role, but you might not have that sort of broader perspective that, say, a role in a smaller company, but one that's just raised money and is on an exciting trajectory can certainly take you. And certainly getting into it's a difficult thing because some people may prioritize stability over upside potential and want to have that and go for a role in a bigger company, and that's completely fine. But I think that certainly if you're able to join a company that is growing, there will be enormous opportunities for you to grow with that company. And certainly just being in some of those being in the right place at the right time when those opportunities present is it's invaluable. So that's what I would say to young people.
Great. Thanks for that. And since you mentioned the influence of the reporting manager when you're looking for a new job, and how he or she could make you successful, did you have such an influence, like a mentor or a reporting manager that you really look up to?
I've had a couple. I've been fortunate to have a couple throughout my career. I would say that in general, in the investment banking world, it's not that common. I think that and maybe that was my experience, but certainly there is a very I would say, what's the right word? It's quite a hardcore sort of working environment, and there's not always someone there with putting their arm around you and saying, "Come along for the ride." However, if you're able to get into the right transactions and you can learn a lot from people just by watching how they operate. So there was a manager, certainly that one of the best managers I had was when I was in Qatar actually. He was a managing director there. And we had a very small corporate finance team, and I think I learned a lot from him, certainly from a relationship management side and the way that he was able to build relationships with clients, with people in the organization, with myself, and to really bring the best out of people by the way that he was able to display empathy, understand, communicate, and then also exert executive influence around in different parts of the company. So I certainly learned a lot from him in a banking perspective. And I would say when I've then transitioned into the startup world, so the first VC-backed startup role I had was with a company called Expert 360 in Australia. And that company was led by a woman called Bridget Loudon. And I would say that certainly I learned a lot from that role and from working with her and going through that post-fundraise massive growth phase of the business. And so, both very different types of leaders and both very different organizations, but they were two people that certainly gave me opportunities and put faith in me to execute on those and sort of gave guidance throughout my tenure in both of those companies. So they're two people that come to mind.
Great. We'll give a shout out to those two names in our show notes.
Excellent.
As we come towards the tail end of this conversation with you, Kurt, do you have a book recommendation for the audience?
So one that really influenced me, well, there's two books actually from a climate perspective and trying to understand where we're headed and sort of where we are. There are two books by Elizabeth Kolbert, and that's Kolbert with a K. One of them is called The Sixth Extinction, which is effectively talking about the era that we are in and that we are going through the sixth mass extinction event. And it's fascinating from a scientific perspective, but also the way she weaves in stories into this sort of scientific narrative. And the other one is a follow-up from her, which is called Under a White Sky, I believe. And that is around the sort of geoengineering element and some of the ways that we are trying to think about how we might use our technology and human influence to undo some of the things that we have done in the past. And it's interesting because when we think about those boom and bust cycles we talk about, and the previous solutions laying the seeds for the next issue, it's interesting to look about that we've the way that we are trying to solve problems that we created in the past with new solutions and what might those then solutions, what issues might arise from those in the future. So there are two books on this topic that I think are very relevant.
Fantastic. We will pull those up in our show notes. As we wrap up this conversation with you, Kurt, where can people find you?
So certainly you can find me on LinkedIn. As apart from my finance and climate work, I really love music and particularly electronic music. So I'm a DJ in my spare time, and I also make electronic music. So yeah, my Instagram is Cobain with a K. That's my DJ name. So yeah, there are two places you can find me. And so if I'm not at my desk doing Excel work, you might find me down listening to some electronic music in the Bay Area somewhere.
Fantastic. That was a good ad. I did not know about it. So we will push those out on the notes. And thank you for your time. You have a safe rest of your week ahead of you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been great to talk.
Thank you, Kurt. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Chief Future Officer Podcast. The Chief Future Officer Podcast is brought to you by Quolum, a CFO's best buddy to buy and manage SaaS. To support this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast application. Links to previous episodes and the rest of the show notes are in the bio, and I'd love to have you check out other episodes. Lastly, if you want to be on this podcast or recommend a friend, let us know in the comments below. Thank you.